everyone, and welcome back to The Future of Work, a multi-generational perspective, a three-part conversation series with the father-daughter duo of David and Rachael McConney. This is a video series that's available on our YouTube channel, so please consider subscribing to it if you haven't already done so. Today, we are in the third and final episode of this three-part conversation series. We set the stage for this conversation against the numerous considerations for the future of work, such as blending of our physical and digital worlds, the increased focus on work-life integration, changing social circumstances, people working longer, and more Gen Z and millennials entering the workforce, leading to the emergence of a multi-generational workforce globally. In episode 1, which came out in September, we took a look at the hiring and job search process and how different generations have different expectations and motivations from their careers, and hence differences in their approach to the job search process and what success looks like for them. In the next month, or the next installment, episode 2, we spent time understanding what happens at the workplace once these multi-generational teams have been hired. What are their expectations from their new employer, and how organizations need to pivot in order to set everyone up for success? And today, in the third and final installment of this conversation series, we're going to hone in on the key success factors for an ecosystem that equips multi-generational teams to harness the power of diversity in thought and perspectives. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to David and Rachael.
Thank you, Meenu. Good to see everyone again, and to be back doing episode 3 of this. So when we started having the conversation about this episode, we started to talk about what is it that drives success on a multi-generational team. And we really came up with these 6 key things. So I just want to, right off the bat, outline them at a high level. The first one is that you need to make sure that everyone checks their ego at the door. The second one, everyone on the team has to commit to getting work done at a higher standard. The third one, building trust and doing team building activities is really important. 4 is that participation, collaboration, and mutual leadership should be emphasized. 5 is there's a need to identify an outcome or an objective that's measurable and results oriented. And then the last one is that you should really have a strong definition of what failure and what success look like for the team. So those were the 6 big kind of buckets that we came up with that are really important for a successful multi-generational team. And we do really want to dive a little bit further into each one. So I will hand it off to you to start with the first one.
Thanks, Rachael. Welcome back, everybody. Meenu, thanks again for facilitating, moderating, keeping us on track. Rachael, we're coming to the end of this series. I'm not sure how I feel about that. It's been fun. So I'm not sure why she asked me to take on ego. I don't know whether she's telling me something, but no, really, I think that this is, for me, this is one of those things that the person who suffers from a little bit too much of this trait is probably the last person who realizes it. And I have worked with both types of leaders. I have to say that those who are able to successfully check their egos at the door and really allow the team to be energized and to take on a role of participation and not always look to the official leader to really sort of take that strong egocentric role are the teams that I have found to be most successful, because it really allows individuals to blossom. I've seen the other side of it, and it's not fun to be a part of, it's not fun to see, and it certainly gets in the way of the success of the team, the success of the organization, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But really, it doesn't matter whether you're the younger person, the older person, the less experienced, the more experienced. For a team to be successful, every single individual must truly, and I can't say it enough in enough different ways, but ensure that individual egos are left at the door. Forget about the notions, the preconceived notions that one may have about your respective skills, about your respective position of ownership, about your respective ideas in the early days. What you're trying to do is to bring the strengths of everybody to the table. And so, as Rachael and I talked about this, I talked about it in the context of my experience, and she dug some of that out in her questioning of me. And then she talked about it in the context of what she would like to see, what she likes to see as part of a team member. This one was one that we spent a lot of time talking about. So, Rachael, unless you have anything to add to that, or Minu, any comments about that, I think we can, move to the second of the six.
I did actually have a comment about that, just to link it. So our last episode, we talked about how some of the notions that we have, the preconceived notions for a millennial like me, it might be that I walk in the room and think that I'm a lot more tech savvy than you. And for you, it might be that you walk in and you look at me and you say, you have no idea what working hard even means. And both of those things are, very ego related. And those are the types of things that we're talking about letting go of. For someone like me to let go of the idea that I might be better at the technical side than someone who's older than me, and vice versa. Those are the kinds of things that we're saying they need to just be cast aside, blank slate, all of that, check the ego at the door, and really just work together as a team. That was my
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think the other part of that too, to acknowledge and recognize the strength of the other team members, mm-hmm. and to deflect or defer to them so that they can. It's always an interesting thing to see people blossom when they recognize that they're being acknowledged, recognized for their particular skill set. So it's a really good point.
And a couple of things. Sorry, yeah. A couple of things popped up for me. One was, Rachael, you had talked about this, I think, in one of the 2 episodes earlier, about just everyone on the team, regardless of what generation they come from, have their strengths. And you alluded to that just now as well. And everyone doesn't need to know everything. Right? And especially as leaders. And that's some of the social conditioning. And there's a lot of national and ethnic cultural identities play a role in that as well, where it's generally assumed that the leader needs to have all the answers. And we're seeing a shift in that, where it is okay for leaders. In fact, it is welcome for leaders to not have all the answers and have that beginner's mindset and a learner's mindset to say, okay, the job of a leader is to really bring the right people to the table. And I know, David, you have talked about this often, that, as a leader, you don't necessarily have to be the smartest person in the room or the person that has all the answers. In fact, if that's the case, you're probably in the wrong room. Right? And the other thing that popped up for me was a quote from John C. Maxwell that I just read a couple of days ago, that leadership is the power of one that harnesses the power of many.
Yeah.
And so that's what popped up for me when you started talking about this. Back to you, Rachael.
That's huge.
I think that's a really good point that you made. I mean, if you hired someone for a team who knew it all and could do it all, I mean, why would you need a team? You would need one person. And I think it's a really good point to bring up, because I mean, you need each individual to have their own strength, and it's fine that they have a weakness because someone else fills that gap. And that kind of is the definition of a team and teamwork. Our next one that we talked about is kind of each individual holding themselves to a high standard. And I think this one's super important, because when you agree to be on a team, you need to be able to hold yourself accountable for whatever piece of the work that you have said you're going to do and to do well. And if you don't hold yourself accountable to that, you're not really giving anyone else on the team any reason to trust you in the future for any projects or anything that you take on as a team. So anything that you commit to, you need to deliver on it, and you need to deliver high quality work. And one of the things that I think I talked about in one of the previous episodes is that, at least for me, and my kind of idea is that people from my generation really don't like being micromanaged. And I know that I don't. I really don't like it at all. But what do you expect if you're not doing your work to that high standard and you're not holding yourself accountable? That's what leads to ultimately being micromanaged. And so if that's something that you want to avoid when you enter onto a team, then you just have to say, okay, this is my portion of the project and I'm putting 100% into it, and you can count on me that it's going to be exactly what it needs to be for us to reach the outcome that we're trying to reach. So I think that that's a really important component of success on a team as well.
I remember, Rachel, you talking about maybe, possibly, for sure, in the context of micromanagement. And you're right. When people know that they can count on you to hold yourself to that standard, to the same standard that you hold others, they leave you alone. They let you do your work. They depend on you, but they know they can depend on you. And I think that is so important in this context of team, is that everybody else knows that you're going to do your part. I remember one manager I used to work with, and she would describe it as sort of a battle scenario, and she talked about the team sort of getting into a circle and backs towards each other, so each of them facing out against this quote unquote enemy. And it was sort of a funny analogy at the time, because not everything is a war, right? But nevertheless, it was to make the point that you knew that you couldn't cover all aspects of the circle if you were surrounded, but you could rely on others within your circle to count on them to have your back. And it's the same thing in what we're talking about. It's a slightly different analogy, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. As a personal story, I was out of work recently for a couple of weeks because I was sick, and I had someone else covering my patients and my workload. And I just found out yesterday, because I've been back now for a week and a half, that one of the people covering for me didn't do something that they were supposed to do. And it's coming back to bite me now because, people did not kind of stay on top of it and know that this other person was responsible while I was out. They're not holding themselves accountable and not producing the high standard of work. So that's just a little personal example that I have that is going on currently for me. And I think that it really does sort of undermine the whole team concept.
Yeah, and you used a word that sort of moves us to the third element, that is this notion of trust in the context of the team. I think that the greatest competitive advantage that any organization has is its team. Yes, as I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again because I like the dripping water, right? But it's this concept of your products are important, your technology is important, your business processes are important. All of those things are important, but the single greatest competitive advantage that any organization has is its team. And to truly be a team, you gotta have mutual respect, you gotta have mutual trust. To your point, Rachel, I mean, you could be so much more successful when you know you can rely on those around you, as opposed to second guessing those around you. And so whatever you do as a leader, as part of a team, invest in those things that help create the right environment. One of the right things in that environment is I know you, you know me, you know my strengths, you know my weaknesses. We have the kind of relationship where you'll cover for my weaknesses, I'll cover for you, because you know I'll cover for yours. Mm-hmm. And that delivers such significant power, as opposed to the scenario where I'm going to sit in the corner and watch you make your mistake and allow you to make your mistake and allow you to fall. And those are the kinds of scenarios that really make it very hard for an organization to be successful. Yeah. So when you said trust, that came to mind.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think a big piece of the trusting element is, spending time together as a team so that you understand each individual's capabilities, so that when it comes down to it, there's no question in your mind, can this person deliver? And so I think that's super important. But then on the flip side, if you know that the person or yourself, that you don't have the capabilities, then there's no issue going and asking for the help that you need. I think that's really key as well. And to build on that part of feeling comfortable asking for that help is working with a leader or other people that you feel are not going to, judge you for asking for it, aren't going to reprimand you for asking for it. In fact, are going to reward you for it. That's a big piece of the trust element as well, I think.
You stole my words there. The thing that popped up for me was the concept of psychological safety.
Yeah.
Right, within teams, and that's so important, especially, I would say, especially so in a multi-generational team, because you're already coming in with a lot of these biases that each one has about the other, from a generational perspective. So in that context, knowing that people are not going to make fun of you, or they're going to be and they're going to be honest with you, you can ask for help, you can raise a risk for the project, and exactly to your point, that you're not going to be judged for it. Instead, people are going to appreciate that you did that. So respect and psychological safety, those are the two elements that came up for me.
Yeah, and if you don't, as a team, a leadership team, a team collaborating on a particular project, if you are afraid of how your fellow team members are going to react if you get something wrong, it's not an environment that really cultivates success. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I don't want to get ahead of that too much, but you see organizations where it's clear that individuals are afraid to give their all because they're worried about, so what if I make a mistake? I always wonder to myself, what happened to cause that particular individual to feel that way? Because I'm not getting the best out of them when they hold back, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And again, like you said, without jumping too far ahead, my current supervisor right now, when I started my job, she made it clear on multiple different occasions, come to me for anything, ask me anything, communicate with me if there is any problem. And as a result, I'm not afraid to ask her any questions. In the beginning, I probably bombarded her with about 10 a day. And there was no sense of, you're annoying me, why don't you know what you're doing? Why do I have to answer these? Not at all. And so as a result, I think for me, I learned a lot faster because of it, because I was able to answer or ask those questions and get answers to them. And so you ultimately end up developing a better employee. Maybe you're investing a little more time up front, but in the end, you're developing a better employee if you have that open relationship where there is that psychological safety, like Minu talked about.
Yep, absolutely. That kind of bleeds over into the next point, Rachel. I don't know if you want to take it.
Yeah. Sorry, Minu, were you saying something though?
Just a couple of things there, actually. One, both of you referenced that, and that brought up this for me. Two things. One is, clear understanding of what the vision and the goal is, and a common understanding of that, as cliched as it sounds, that's oftentimes it's missed out. And the second thing, to David's point about, what happens if someone makes a mistake? I think an understanding of what the blast radius is, right? So what is the tolerance for an unexpected outcome or an unplanned outcome? And I think the limits of that, well, what are we aiming for, and how much tolerance do we have as a team for something not going as planned? Those two things, a lot of times teams don't clarify, and that adds to the fear of retribution amongst the team members. That's something that I've seen.
A really, really good point.